All right. Hi, Jason. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us today so that we can have a chat about your incredible sort of journey into coding. And you've got a really diverse background, so I'm really keen to get to the bottom of a lot of things that you talked about. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
That's great. And you're in the Lyft offices in San Francisco at the moment, which is where you work. So thanks very much for taking time out in the middle of your workday. I really appreciate it. And I think everything we're going to talk about is going to be of great value.
Yeah, me too.
So Jason, so just so you know, some of the questions that I'm asking you are questions that people have asked me in connection both with the course and also on Twitter and places like Reddit and other places where I've seen these questions come up over and over again. And I thought someone with your background, your direct experience in transitioning into a career in software dev would actually have some great perspectives, not just in your article, but just otherwise as well. So what I'm going to do really is take you through some of the questions that people have asked. And I'll also mention who's asked them, and then you can sort of share, your thoughts on them and how you go about it. So, I'm mindful of your time, so let's get right into it straight away. The first question is from someone called Bhavna, and the question is, it was really addressed to me, but I like to redirect this to you because I think she'd benefit from, and other people have asked this question, is when you decided to commit yourself to learning to code, what were your reasons that justified that big effort? And I think, that's also from a career changer. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there were a few. I think the decision to finally take the plunge was the culmination of many little things that added up over time. But a few of the ones that were, I think, especially significant making the decision I can battle off. The first was that I was at the time I was a management consultant, and then I left to do a brief product stint at a startup and was looking for my next product gig, and started coding on the side as a way to make my application, the technical aspects of my application, stronger. And the way I say it is I had too much fun. And so in that sense, it was very organic. It became something over time that I wanted to spend more and more. I wanted to invest more and more in, and then had the choice of either investing full time in it or taking kind of pursuing my existing career path. And that organic nature was really encouraging. And I figured it would be terrific to spend time in something that I was having too much fun in. A few of the other things that really popped out to me were that I was looking to have multiple skill sets. I had heard a quote somewhere that said, it's really difficult to be the top 1% in the world at almost anything. But if you're the top 80% in a couple of different skill sets, then almost immediately you're the top 1% at the intersection of the two. I also had the sense that if I could learn this, then I could do anything. And that would be a hugely liberating, not just professional transformation, but personal transformation. And then I think I had the sense that there is currently a shortage of software engineers, and that's likely to remain true in the future. So yet another reason for this to be one of my skill sets. And then lastly, I think I had a sense that my generalist consulting product manager background had left me with some multiplier skills. I was excited to see to build a concrete, deep technical skill set on which I could apply those multiplier skills. So that seemed to be a particularly nice combination.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I've got a bunch of other questions, so I won't spend too much time digging in. But you said two things that I'd really like to ask you a little bit more about. One is, how would you define a multiplier skill for people who haven't really understood or experienced that expression before? What is a multiplier skill?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a vague term, but the way I think about it are those skill sets that would be helpful in almost any scenario. So the big ones that come to mind, where we have a little bit of background noise. How is the noise?
Yeah, it's a little bit mixed. But, I mean, we can hear you, but yeah, we can hear the other things as well. That's all right.
Okay. It's a soul trash can moving across the floor here.
Of course.
Hopefully it's getting farther and farther away.
Yeah, no, it's better now.
So to your question about what is a multiplier skill, I think I am using it in kind of a nebulous, ambiguous way here. But what I mean by that is any skill set that is going to be helpful in almost any scenario. And there's a few that I think immediately jump to mind. One is structured thinking and critical thinking, which I think are two related pieces of the puzzle. Another is structured communication, also something that will be helpful in almost any scenario. There is often an aspect of learning how to learn that is, I think, a multiplier skill set in the sense that it'll help you get up to speed quickly and effectively in any environment. And then I can imagine maybe a handful of others. But as a consultant, I began my career in the business of selling perspective, or in the business of persuasion. And so the skill sets that I was specifically seeking to develop were, and often rated, my performance is rated on, were exactly some of those. They were structured thinking, structured communication, ability to work with a team. Right. And those things that are helpful everywhere. But if you can put that on top of a very specific skill set, like being able to build or provide a particular kind of expertise, now I think you have a particularly salient or powerful combination.
Yeah. Okay. And the other sub question to that was because you mentioned that you had a lot of fun. Now, did you have a technical or a mathy or a sciencey sort of background before, or an interest or childhood hobby? Were you into that kind of things, or did you just find it fun because it was intellectually satisfying? Like, when you say fun, what do you mean?
I found when I say fun, what do I mean?
Specifically in the context of, you sounded like it was unexpectedly fun when you started doing it on the side to pad up your technical side of the CV, right? That's what you were trying to do.
Yeah, it was unexpectedly. It was unexpected in the sense that I didn't see myself going all in on making that kind of my next chapter of my profession. Profession. I knew that it was such a so to your question around what I found fun about it first, and then like whether or not my background affected that. I thought it was terrific that there were different ways of solving, different elegant ways of solving problems that had a clear, like, immediate feedback loop as to whether or not something worked. Because I built it, and it worked or it didn't, to accomplish my specific task. It was challenging me to think in new ways, and I had the sense that I was enjoying the progress, and if I continued to enjoy the progress, that would compound over time to the point where it wasn't just me thinking, oh, that's really neat how you derive a higher order function in JavaScript, which was like one of the things I did in like the second week I was of learning to code.
Yeah.
But instead, like, what is it's really interesting to think about how I can build a full-blown, like, full-stack web application that solves this business need that has the potential to get into Y Combinator.
Yeah.
Like the potential for compounding there was accelerating.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer. I think that's actually the reason why I ended up shutting down the startup I was working in. Is my technical co-founder quit, and I needed to either quit or learn to code. And I started teaching myself to code, and I was spending way more time on that than on the actual startup, and that was a dead giveaway. That this was a new chapter in my life as well. So yeah, no, I can completely relate. Okay, so the next question is from Irene, and this is all very much applicable to you. You left a stable job at a good company in San Francisco. In your case, to take the risk. And no doubt lots of people would have pointed out that risk. So how did that make you feel, and how did you process that?
I was actually fairly surprised when people pointed out the risk, because it didn't seem to me as much of a risk. I thought it would be a far greater risk to not invest in something that I would regret having passed on later. The risk of regret was far greater than the risk of any downside of taking a few months and investing the kind of money that I did in a boot camp, and then subsequently the job search. Yeah. I had several friends tell me that a few people commented on how that was a risky move, and were like, "Wow, I can't believe you're doing this," which I just kind of took in stride. And a few people surprised me again after the fact when they told me, "I was worried about you. I was like, oh, well, that makes one of us.
Yeah.
I was never worried.
Yeah.
And the reason I was never worried is because I knew I would regret not, like, the only thing that stands between me and the life of regret is taking a plunge, is
Sure.
taking an occasional risk like this. And so that was number one. Number two is I knew that I had, like, worst case scenario, I would do the boot camp. I would then job search for 3 months. My funds would run out, and I would have a backstop in place. I would, if I needed to, I'd work as a bartender to bridge the gap between getting a job similar to what I had before.
Yeah.
And so it would cost me 6 months and some money, 6 months and some savings. And worst case scenario is that I end up where I started.
Yeah.
And furthermore, if even if it turns out that I somehow couldn't end up where I started, somehow couldn't get a job, very similar to what I used to have. Even all of those what if or what's the worst case scenario things, if you actually write them out and look at them, were not bad.
Yeah.
They're my savings amount and my current and for immediately foreseeable income numbers change a little bit.
Yeah.
And no matter how we could sit here and we could dream about the extremes, and I think none of them sound terrible. They seem terrible until you honestly think about them.
Yeah.
That was how I felt it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I think it was the founder of GoDaddy. I can't remember exactly what his name is. It'll come back to me. I think something Parsons, Jim Parsons or something. But he has a bunch of rules that he's put up in his blog about, taking chances in life. And one of the rules is always confront the risk. Be very, very express about what you think is the worst case scenario. And the more you confront it, the more you'll realize it's not as bad as you think. And the odds of it coming out are about the same as the odds of outstanding success are about the same. They're both outlier events. And chances you're going to be somewhere in the middle, and that'll give you a lot of consolation and hope. And I think that is 100% true. That that's what happens.
Actually, and I might jump in and say I'm actually my instinct is that something terrible event or some incredible event, the two outliers, might not even be what I had in my head. I actually had in my head tremendous potential for upside, almost no downside. Yeah. There's a clear floor to the downside. There's no clear ceiling to the upside. Yeah. And the other thought that you sparked is, in quoting the founder of, maybe might have been GoDaddy, I was thinking of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and the known Stoic philosopher, who used to take a couple days, I think, every month or so, to kind of shed his royalty clothing and to walk out and live on the street for a few days with some of the poorest and poor in Rome, with the thinking that being is this really what I fear? Sleeping in an uncomfortable place, wearing different clothes and eating different food. If this is all I have to fear, I actually don't have anything to fear.
Correct. I think Epictetus used to do that as well. He used to practice poverty a few days a month to inoculate himself from the fear, exactly in the vein that Marcus Aurelius did. So
interesting.
And that's a really good way to do about it. But so let me push you a little bit more on that, because I can hear some of the objections that I've heard to that point over the years, which is what happens if I've got kids or I've got mortgages and I've got a family and it's no longer just me. Not all of us can go back to. I mean, these are arguments that people in their later stages would legitimately have. And I think a lot of the points that you raised apply there too. But do you have anything more, any thoughts on that? And I know it's not, we can't answer everyone's questions necessarily, but do you have any thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I don't think I do, because I'm so keenly aware of the privileged scenario in which I was in which the equation was so much simpler. It was just me. I was in a financial position where I knew I'd have a little bit of cushion on the backside of the boot camp, 3 months worth, in order to job search. And when there are other people who are relying on you and your financial situation is different, I don't think I can honestly speak to your downside, because I haven't thought through it in the same way that one who's viscerally feeling it might. I guess the only thing that if I were thrown into that situation, some of the underlying principles may still guide some of my early thinking.
I agree.
Which is that I'm likely to regret not doing those things and taking the risk, and maybe I'm fearing something more than I would if I really wrote down what's the worst case scenario. And perhaps the upside has no ceiling and the downside has a limit. But I can't weigh in on that specifically.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a very tricky problem. I mean, just share 15 seconds on my personal experience on that. I mean, I don't have kids, but I do have a family and wife, but I've been in a corporate career for 14 years, and it's a big jump to move from that to nothing. But I was going to do it for the startup anyway, and exactly what you said, that the fear or the risk of regret of inaction is much greater than the upside that comes from the action. There's significantly big asymmetry in that. And what I had to do was I had to plan for 4 years to save up to do that, right? So it was a very long arc for me to get to that stage, and to save up financially and sort of mentally prepare myself and all the rest of that. And I found that the hardest thing there was to not talk yourself out of it. In that time, that while you were in preparation, that you weren't talking yourself out of it. And so that's what I've told a few people who've asked me if this question is the closest I've come to that, because it's not quite squarely on the point. If what happens if you have family and kids and all that, is that if you really want it and you're willing to pay the price, it's still possible. It's just that the price appears a bit greater at that point in time, because psychologically it feels like a bigger drop, or a further to fall. And we as human beings, loss aversion is a very real thing for our psychology, right? So anyway, so that was just my musings in it. So the next question is kind of related. This is from Linda. What were the doubts, fears, and misgivings that crossed your mind? And you said that there weren't that many. Were there any that were particularly persistent, and how do you speak to yourself about them? It may be that your answer overlaps with the previous one, but is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Yeah. I did not know if I would get a job in time before my finances ran out. That was something that was a real doubt for me all the way up until I guess I had my first offer, and I knew that there was somebody was going to pay me code. So that was a doubt that persisted, very real, it was very real for 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And I think that had the threat of compounding with this idea that I have an uncertain outcome with so much work to do, and those two things I think could have kind of colluded to bring down my motivation, bring down my excitement, bring down my well-being during this process, which is related, I think, to my learning rate. So those were very real things, and I think the mentality and learning state were such an important part of this whole process. The things, though, that I would there's basically one thing that I would do after my morning meditation every day to this point, and that was I would remind myself that one way of looking at this job search and one way of looking at this career pivot is something with an uncertain outcome, with a clear cost, and a tremendous amount of work, and then get caught up in the self-critical or ruminating thinking of all the bajillion different things that I need to do, and the many that I'm doing already, I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
Or the other way. That's one way to look on the situation. The other way to look on the situation is, what a treat that I have months dedicated full time to learning this new skill that I jumped into in the first place because I was interested in it, can just spend all day every day stoking and responding to my curiosity.
Yeah, it's a privilege. Yeah.
And with that reminder, I would take a minute to dive into that kind of thinking, and then I'd start my day. And I think that was
so you sort of reframe the thing as from what a drag and what a threat to what an opportunity, and this is wonderful that I can actually do this, right? That reframing does help, doesn't it?
I certainly felt that way.
Yeah.
And you point out, I think, the core concept clearly, which is that many threats can be reframed as opportunities.
Yeah.
You might see fear as a sign that it's something that's important to you.
Yeah.
Or you might see nerves as a sign of excitement. I think that's something Bruce Springsteen talks about before you take a concert stage, just to get the clammy hands and the heartbeat going before every concert. And he'd teach himself that was excitement, not nervousness.
Yeah. Yeah, and physiologically, they say it's not really very different. The anticipation and thrill of competition or performance or looking forward to something, excitement is physiologically not that different from that of fear. So you can completely tell your mind and tell yourself a different story, and it takes a bit of practice, but that's just reconditioning your mind to interpret signals differently that actually favor you rather than hinder you. And that's a
that
great
resonates with my personal experience.
Yeah, and completely does with mine. And when I share that sort of thinking with other people, there's a habit in a lot of people and a natural inclination to say, "Oh, that's for you," or "that takes a certain kind of person." They see the result of that thinking and assume that that's inherent, and that's part of that someone's makeup, as opposed to a learned behavior. And I encourage people to think that, well, what you're comparing your insides to my outsides. My insides are not that different from you. I'm as worried about things as you are, but I've sort of tried to practice a different way of thinking. So that's really great that you brought that up. Thank you for that. I think that's really valuable.
I like that. I like that line. You're comparing your insides to my outsides.
Yeah, which I think is very true. So, all right. So here's a question from Hamza. What do you know now about coding that you'd wish you'd known back then when you were thinking of jumping in?
Yeah. So this may sound very meta and abstract, and if it does, we can prod me on what we can maybe brainstorm some other things. But I think the biggest thing that I would tell younger me is attempt to be comfortable with the concept of abstraction. And I think this may vary, from person to person, but for me, I had this discomfort with this idea of just, I don't understand what that's going on over there, but I'm just going to use the inputs or outputs like a black box and just be okay with that. I wanted to really understand it deeply before being comfortable with moving on. And I think generally that is a great instinct, because deep understanding unlocks experimentation and intuition in a way that it doesn't if you just only kind of understand how it works. And experimentation and intuition, in turn, will be so much more valuable. At the same time, though, I think when you're learning fast and you're trying to build something, especially for the first time, it's not leaning all into the let's understand everything deeply tendency that I had is not nearly as effective as holding it in creative tension with the idea of just getting something to work as quickly as possible. So the advice that I would give to a younger me, or the answer to the question, what do I know now about programming that I didn't know, is this idea that there's it's not always about knowing everything all the way down to the final degree of explanation, and it's not always about just like conjuring crazy new code at the spink of your fingertips because you copy and pasted it from Stack Overflow and pulled something else from this website, and what do you know, it works. It's actually the sweet spot between the two, and in every given moment you're trying to do both at once or choose one or the other.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would share with.
Okay, that's a very practical sort of insight, and I think for those people who encounter it who haven't gone too deep into code, I think that's something that they do well to keep in mind for as they get deeper and deeper. That balancing act between being able to implement and being able to understand everything about what you're implementing, is a really important point. Yeah, I agree. Okay, great.
I've heard it described before as conjuring versus scribing, and the answer is not to do one or the other, but to do both at the same time, which is likely impossible. But find your sweet spot.
That makes a lot of sense. Here's another one that I like, also from Hamza. What did you actually know about programming and programmers back then before you started? And what were your impressions of the field from the outside looking in?
It's hard for me to put myself back in the shoes of somebody totally green.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, programmers seem to be, there are some surface level characteristics, mostly male, which was, I found fascinating and frustrating, because I didn't understand why there wouldn't be, that's a much bigger problem. But I thought it was silly that they were mostly male. I sometimes felt as if they spoke a different language, which I think is, now that I'm further in the field, very much, and I guess in any field, like you've got your own jargon, your own concepts, and I think that makes sense and I understand why. But I also, I think, felt that they had a difficult time communicating to somebody that didn't have that language. And that sometimes their difficulty would result in the audience feeling as if they should be able to understand. When in reality, I think it was on the programmer or the developer to find ways to communicate to an audience unfamiliar with these concepts.
Absolutely.
And I think those, actually all of those kind of perspectives from the outside looking in kind of remain the same today. I still think that we as software engineers rarely communicate as clearly, as succinctly, and as using like basic terminology as we could. Richard Feynman has a quote, Nobel laureate quantum physicist, I think, has a quote: "If you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you don't understand it."
Yeah.
And I think that could be applied across the tech industry.
Yeah.
It's a great effect.
Yeah. What do you think of this one? Because this is one that I personally felt, and when I mentioned it publicly in a blog post, a lot of people mentioned that they felt it, is that, and keep in mind that I'm quite well educated, come from a background of reasonable amounts of privilege, spent a career in corporate law, and so it's I have a background where I should have confidence about my intellectual ability. So there's no reason why I should doubt my intellectual ability. But from the outside looking in, and I don't know whether it was the effects of media and stuff, but I'd always thought that programmers were a very unusual breed of extraordinarily, almost dysfunctionally intelligent people. In the sense that socially they weren't always going to be the ones that would tolerate people who were intellectually less capable of staying up to speed as they were. Incredibly mathematically minded, highly quantitative, highly analytical. That sort of stereotype was very much somewhere influencing my perception of that. And also, not that that was a bad thing in and of itself, but the reason that became counterproductive was it discouraged me from thinking I could be one. Did you ever experience that on the outside looking in, or maybe in San Francisco you were just immersed in that culture?
Yeah, and so specifically the idea that this profession attracts an unusual or a kind of self-selects for a type of person that seems to be highly intelligent. It doesn't have always the same social skills that we see in other professions. And then secondly, like, does that then leave you with vulnerable to impostor syndrome as you step into enter?
Great way to put it. Yes.
Yeah, I think both of those resonate with me. I think the moving out to San Francisco and being kind of near and in the ecosystem, even back when I used to be a consultant in corporate nonprofits, I think I was able to see, I was fortunately exposed to a breadth of software engineers and able to see that those that did have social skills and were people-first people, both either because they were selfless and also skilled at being warm and communicative, were especially effective engineers. And so it was able to falsify any hypothesis I had that in order to succeed in this field, you just check the social skills at the door. In fact, just like anything else in life, those are super important.
Yeah. And
interestingly, maybe even more valuable in a place where, for whatever reason, there seems to be a less of them than you might find.
Would they be a multiplier skill as well, Jason? Would you classify that? Yeah.
Social skills? Yeah, I totally would. Yeah, I totally would.
Yeah.
And then to your point about whether that would leave me susceptible to, vulnerable to imposter syndrome, thinking about, okay, well, there seems to be some differences that I'm alarmed about compared to the average software engineer.
Yeah.
That I think also, I imagine so many of us, as we try to enter any new profession, especially software engineering, there's these huge tower of technical knowledge that you need to climb, is real. Somewhere along the line, I think I just picked up some sort of belief that there were ways to communicate my curiosity and excitement to learn on the one hand, and the confidence in my approach to learning that on the other hand, that when shown together to anybody, would always result in, like, well, not always, but would very much likely lead to a positive exchange. Even so I could fully admit and be transparent and eliminate the cognitive load of me pretending I know something.
Yeah.
I don't know something. Instead, I'm just going to show my curiosity and excitement, and I'm also going to show that I'm not just asking you to spoon feed it to me. I'm thinking about it in this critical way, and I'm excited, and I'm confident that if I continue to think about it this way, I'm going to get to the answer.
Yeah.
And that those two things together, like, kind of warmth on the one hand and respect on the other, would, like, help me embrace a situation that I may otherwise have to deal with and process it.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point. So would you, if I were to play this back to you in a specific context so that people could sort of mull over it, if they're in an interview situation, or it could be an early stage interview, and getting to know people on the team and all the rest of that, and there is a scenario where it's a technical question that's come up or a discussion that's happening, and they're not completely across all the innards of it, all the details of it. At that point in time, if you demonstrate your genuine interest in the subject, your willingness to engage with things you don't know and wrestle with them, and also keep open to other suggestions and learning from others around you, would that enthusiasm be very positively received in the community in the context of a job interview situation?
My experience is so much so.
Okay.
I have an early memory from my first on-site interview, in which I began the problem not knowing the answer, and communicated that I didn't know the answer, and I was excited to figure out the answer the entire time. And as I communicated that, and my energy grew as I was getting closer to the answer,
yeah.
I felt like the interviewers kind of got excited, and their energy was growing with me.
Yeah, wonderful.
And there was, and that happened a couple times, I think, in that on-site. And one of them, I didn't actually end up getting to the answer. And yet I was passed to the next round, and during the next round, I was talking with a few different interviewers and the same interviewer there. So it's one interview, multiple interviewers, just me. And one interviewer said to the other interviewer halfway through the interview, "Steven's the kind of guy, if he doesn't know it now, he's going to figure it out."
Figure it out, yeah.
Which was clear at that point. I was like, well, I don't know exactly what I did to win you over, but I'm glad that you're championing me to this other interview.
Makes sense, yeah.
And I think the only way to explain that is that he had seen something in either my excitement or energy and approach that led him to believe that.
And I think that would, if I was an employee and a hiring manager, I know in the past, in previous careers, I've always looked for people who knew the boundaries of their knowledge and were enthused or excited to try and solve what they didn't know, because real life is more about what you don't know than what you know anyway. That's just the nature of the world. So it's the attitude that counts at that point in time really a lot, because you're not going to get discouraged and set back by it.
That absolutely resonates. And I think there's other ways to cut it that I think also support this point, which is that what I know now is actually much less predictive, I think, as long as I'm growing quickly, then a year from now, my rate of growth matters a lot more than my current knowledge. And so as an employer, if I'm looking for employees, you may be coming in and meeting 80% of my criteria. But if you're coming in meeting 80% of my criteria, it looks like you're growing at 10% year over year. Then in a few years, you're going to be, I picked the wrong numbers there, but in a short matter of time, you're going to be crushing it. And that's an investment that I'm willing to make. Whereas if you come in with 99% of my criteria and it looks like you're stagnant, then I actually think now most employers aren't looking that way, and they have their own constraints around, I need somebody to help me out right now with this, I can't invest them in this way. That varies on a case-by-case basis, but all that is to say is that growth and learning is really, really important, if not more important.
No, I totally agree with that, and I think you've brought that point out really, really well. Here's another question that I quite like, which I think a lot of people... the context for this question is because we are having a discussion online about why there's a high attrition rate. So, for example, when I was doing stuff on Free Code Camp, and I write for them every now and then, their founder had mentioned that there is a high attrition rate because a lot of people come in, they're really hungry, and then they meet obstacle after obstacle, mismatched expectations, and so there's a high attrition rate. People just say, they disqualify themselves, really. That's the long and the short of it, is they say, whoa, I can't do this, and they don't think I can't do this yet. They just think I can't do this, full stop. And so they disqualify, they self-select out, right? And I really want to encourage people to understand that that's quite normal. Like, you spend most of your time being stuck, and that's the normal state, especially in development. So the question is from Linda, and the question is, when you can't understand something, when you're totally stuck, how do you deal with it, and how do you decide whether something is within your ability or not? And I think it's a great question.
Yeah. So my first instinct is, on the second question, decide whether or not it's within my ability.
Yeah.
That's never a fixed answer. It's always, if not now, then when.
Great. Yeah.
It's only a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that growth mindset is really valuable, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's like, because even if you're in a place in which it seems outrageous to just jump to this assumption that anything is going to be within my ability at some point, because it seems super intimidating. Like, even doing so and sticking with that mentality, you'll find a couple of baby steps happen, and then you see some returns.
Yeah.
And then that makes that belief a little bit more easier. And then you take a few more steps, and it makes that belief even more easier. And that cycle is a self-reinforcing and self-fulfilling process.
Yeah.
So to the last part of that question, I think the answer is clear. If not now, then when? To the first part of the question, which is, if you're totally stuck, how do you deal with it? A few things that come to mind. The first is, I always find it always, I find it valuable to articulate what it is I do not understand as specifically as I possibly can. Because that exercise, and if I'm going to speak with somebody about it, I'm usually writing it down. And I like writing it down for myself too. But whether it's writing it down or mentally, that exercise forces you to incorporate what you do understand.
Yeah.
List out your various hypotheses and your rationale behind them.
Yep.
And even as actually a number of times I've done this exercise and realized, in explaining that to myself, kind of almost like proved or dissolved the uncertainty in front of me just by doing that.
Yeah.
But then if it still remains an issue and I still have a couple maybe competing hypotheses and I can see it going both ways, now it means my questions are very specific as I can. And that allows me to look for effective resources on the topic, or ask or solicit for help in a way that I couldn't have before.
Yeah.
It's always easier for somebody to help me the more specific I am in my requests. And that's kind of the first exercise. There's also, I think, a few other things then that might come into play, which is then asking, okay, now that I've done this, who do I think is the best person that might be, one, successful in this area, but then two, capable of explaining it? Might be a little bit of let me scan some resources. I want to go broad before I go deep to figure out which ones really tackle my question or topic. There's also, sometimes it depends on what I'm working on, whether it's like trying to memorize facts, which usually doesn't come up to understanding trouble, tackling a concept around understanding or building a skill.
Yep.
And, whether it's actually understanding versus generating the skills, different approaches. This is probably more of like, I need questions answered. This means I probably need to change my practice drills and reflect on it a little differently. So maybe some tweaks in there.
Yeah, great. So can I sort of play back something to you, because I'm listening to your process and it sounds familiar in the sense like it's obviously something I do intuitively, or people just start to learn that that's a good way to solve. And let me know if this sort of resonates with you as well. One of the ways, sort of taking from that that I've learned to approach it also, is to really understand what the possible reasons for me having gotten stuck are. And broadly, they fall into two buckets. One is I don't have the information, the foundational bricks in the wall I'm building. Some of the bricks are missing in terms of knowledge, so there are knowledge gaps. And then the other thing is my mental model is incomplete or wrong. It's usually, to me, a combination of these things. So for example, classic example is early on when I would Google for answers to issues, because I didn't know that there were foundational pieces that I didn't know, I'd Google the wrong thing, or I'd look for the wrong thing on Stack Overflow, or find answers that were just all over the place, not clear enough. But I found the more specific I was in my query, the better the results I was getting, the better my ability to troubleshoot. And that's when I realized it's because I didn't know there were a lot of things, so if I'm looking at how to implement a hash table and I look at a hash function, and then I realize, there's all this stuff about cryptography and hashing, and sometimes checksums would come in there, which is because of the inaccurate search string. So that was a knowledge gap issue, that not having a sharp enough search string, or having a mental model of how imports can work, or how a higher order function works and composes functions, So I found that those are the two categories that often it's a combination of one or more that cause me to get stuck. And often if I've been coding for a while, I get stuck because my pattern of thinking has gotten crystallized or frozen, and just stepping away, coming back, doing something else, unlocking the brain a bit really helps, So, well, and so
yeah.
Would you agree with that? Was that something that sort of resonated with your experience as well?
Yeah, it does resonate. I hadn't thought of it in those terms before. I have thought a little bit about how even if you're an A student, at least in the U.S. K-12 student system, maybe you're getting 95s on all of your content year over year over year. That means every year in every subject, in every unit, you have a 5% gap. Which means that even if you're an A student, the tower that you've built is riddled with holes in such a way that in such a way that it makes sense to be aware of those and seek to plug those and really get a fundamental understanding that allows you to unlock experimentation, intuition. The other thought that you triggered in sharing that is I'm thinking now of when I was a real beginner in certain situations. A lot of learning to code experiences, a lot of my very first coming on the job here at Lyft. And I would write out the questions that I had, and I would nest them. So there were bullet points. In order to get to this question, there might be a question underneath it, and I might be several questions deep. And maybe now it's a tree because I had a few questions to begin with.
Yeah.
And these questions were, what was terrific about the nesting, writing them out as bullet points, is that it made it more specific and kept me on track.
Yeah.
And so as I was looking to these various Stack Overflow posts, I was beginning to put the puzzle together as to which ones were relevant and which ones weren't relevant.
Yes.
I was able to realize that I was going down a rabbit hole and I didn't actually need this to answer the question at hand.
Exactly, yeah.
And then it also made me more familiar with the discomfort of having so many questions it seems difficult where to begin. And how that fortunately begins to narrow over time. And now I think I probably have less nested questions.
That's
in
very
certain
true.
areas to get to an answer.
No, I think that beautifully illustrates exactly what I was trying to say. No, that's spot on. You do tend to have compounded questions that sort of meld into a mental map of the terrain after a while, which is great. Yeah, that's really good. All right, I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to we have a couple more questions, but I'm going to ask you just two more. One's very general, so let's go with the one that's less general. Which is a fun question that I see a lot online, a lot of arguments. So it's really a bit of a fun question here. But do you have any idea what a great programmer is?
I wouldn't claim to be an authority on this. I think of the really great programmers that I have so far encountered in my experience, I think they have a deep grasp of the fundamentals. I think they're insatiably curious, and they do a great job of finding that sweet spot that we were talking about earlier between understanding on the one hand and implementing or conjuring on the other hand.
Yeah.
Those are these three things that immediately come to mind that I would expect to be present in this wizard of a programmer.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, that's a very practical, great answer. And all right, so I'm not going to sort of take up more time of yours, Jason, because you've been very generous already. Is there anything else that you considered incredibly valuable in your experience and journey that we've not covered in this conversation, or that didn't find space in the blog, which I thought was like a Bible for understanding and plotting a path? It's a really good map.
That's flattering of you to call it that. There's, I'm sure, 1,000 different ways to do it. So I'm hopeful that might spark a few ideas for people's own experimentation and discovery. I think something that I think maybe has come out a little bit in the blog and in our conversation so far that I've just really hit on the head as like a point to land. So I don't think you can overstate the value of the mentality that you take to the whole journey from career pivot, learning a new skill, job search, however you want to slice it. And I think specifically the two pillars that I was most I'm so grateful looking back. I think I was able to cultivate in my mentality. It was on the one hand curiosity, and on the other hand, the words that are coming to mind are like gratitude and or self-compassion.
Yeah.
So I think if you remit stoking and moving from a place of curiosity will allow you to enjoy the process, regardless of the result, which is really the only thing that's in your control. It will put you in a situation where you're creating habits over goals, and very likely possible that your habits will end up overshooting any goals that you initially put out there.
Yeah.
And it was also, I think, the antidote to shortcuts, to cognitive biases, to mistakes, to being downtrodden by failure or set back by failure. It capitalizes on enough curiosity, capitalizes on every failure. And then on the other hand, self-compassion, I think, is a really terrific, mutually reinforcing mentality with curiosity.
Yeah.
Because it, your curiosity is at its best when it's throwing you up against failure. And yet the threat of failure is that you begin those ruminating or self-critical feedback, or kind of mental loops in your head that detract from motivation, kind of make your approach less effective.
Yeah.
Can threaten bringing the whole thing to a screeching halt. And with enough, if each time that self-critical voice springs into play, if instead it's actually a self-compassionate voice of instead of I can't believe I messed up here, it's more like, oh, my friend, that was a bummer. That didn't work out.
Yeah.
But let's try this again.
Yeah.
That I think unlocks a really healthy and sustainable.
It's wonderful to hear you say that, actually, Jason, because it's not specific to programming at all. I mean, what you're talking about to me is really an attitude for life, and for anything that you want to encounter, anything at all, whether it's personal, professional, it's so fundamental that it's what someone once told me, and it's not a new idea, but you've got an inner coach and you've got an inner critic, and which one are you going to let out of the box more often, and it's the same voice. You just again reframe it, and I think what you said there is so powerful, because a lot of people assume the process is only about just the brute effort, the hours, without understanding the psychological and spiritual. Spiritual, I'm using it loosely, but that the mentality of it is steeped in kindness and a positive frame of mind, from which everything else can then flow productively. So you get more out of the brute per unit of brute effort. You get more if your mindset's positive than it is negative.
Totally. Yeah. Key phrase there being from which everything else flows.
Yeah.
I think it is the first step and the bedrock on which all your towers are built.
I agree.
And this is actually, us having this exchange now is making me think about all the research I've since come across on the value of self-compassion. I don't think I've made it anywhere in the world. Ranging from how we ruminate less when we're self-compassionate. There's lots of studies about how there's well-being. Interestingly, there was a New York Times article on why self-compassion beats self-confidence, suggesting that we actually learn more from our mistakes, which was counterintuitive to a younger me, because I would have thought lots of self-confidence plus lots of self-criticism would have been the right mix to kick myself in the ass and then go for a bigger goal.
Yeah.
But it may turn out that self-compassionate habits led to even greater thinking in that time period. So lots of value there. I think can't be overstated.
No, I agree. Look, thank you so much for your time. That was really fantastic. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn off the recording now.